want to bring in my panel right now, Chris Kofinis, the Democratic strategist, and Evan Siegfried, the Republican strategist. I want to start with some strong language in the meantime. We were talking about Beto O'Rourke, who was there in Iowa. He used just moments ago about the U.S.-Israel relationship. Take a listen.
The U.S.-Israel relationship is one of the most important relationships that we have on the planet. And that relationship, if it is to be successful, must transcend partisanship in the United States, and it must be able to transcend a prime minister who is racist, as he warns about Arabs coming to the polls, who wants to defy any prospect for peace as he threatens to annex the West Bank.
So you got it right there. He was calling Bibi Netanyahu racist. Chris, we know Republicans are eyeing the Jewish vote. How does this play into that strategy?
You know, it's a good question. I don't know the answer. I don't know the answer to that. I mean, I think it's probably a mixed reaction depending on what part of the Jewish vote you're talking about. I mean, right now, I think, you know, here's part of the challenge, especially when you're talking about the Democratic race. I mean, really, it all begins obviously in Iowa. That is where I think the main focus is. When you have this many candidates in a race and more seemingly coming every day, it is going to be very difficult to run a 5, 6, 10 state strategy. You really are going to be narrowed and focused on the key ones in the beginning, because you either catch fire with, you know, in Iowa or New Hampshire, South Carolina, Nevada, or you don't. And if you don't, you're not going to be going past that.
Yeah, you do get a sense, Evan, that the president is trying to make this a wedge issue among Democratic voters. It's a big base for the Democrats. I believe they get 77% support among the Jewish community.
Yeah.
President trying to divide?
I think the president is trying to get in on defining this, but it's Democrats who have been defining it, because we've seen more and more anti-Semitism cropping up to the top of the Democratic Party. We're seeing Rashida Tlaib, we're seeing Ilhan Omar putting out anti-Semitic tropes and then giving faint apologies that really don't cut it. And you see other members of the Jewish caucus within the Democrats saying this is wrong and Ilhan Omar should be held accountable. It was a disaster when Ilhan Omar was brought up in the floor and there was a resolution put forward to condemn anti-Semitism. It went from condemning anti-Semitism to, oh, we just condemn things that are bad. It was no spine. And there are plenty of Jews, especially Democrats, who are becoming more and more uncomfortable with the direction that the Democratic Party is going with Judaism.
But there are also many Jews who are not as closely aligned with Israel, who see that the president is playing the Israel card, which is not the same as playing to Jewish voters here in America.
Yes, which means that many of these Jewish voters could just stay home in 2020.
Interesting point there. I do want to look at pivot a little bit here and take a look at some recent survey here of Iowa voters, which found some interesting information. Biden, who is, of course, not even officially in the race, is leading as a favorite candidate for those polled. He also is the candidate Democratic voters believe can beat Trump. An interesting thing here, 63% of Democrats polled said they would rather vote for a candidate who can beat Trump over one that shares their ideology and values. Chris, is that really what is at play for the party right now?
Absolutely.
So you have beat Trump at the top, health care, immigration, whatever else.
Yeah, I mean, here's the part that I think is interesting about how the race is going to shape up. People are going to kind of always balance these two dynamics, right? Who can beat Trump, and obviously who has a vision and kind of policies that reflects what they believe is important for the country and for their, for the party. I think what you're seeing in Iowa and what you saw in our poll, I think, was a very interesting dynamic where, yes, Biden and Sanders are clearly strong candidates, but there is another group of contenders that are really potentially formidable, and those are like Senator Harris, Senator Warren, Beto O'Rourke, and even Senator Booker, who I think have a real shot. And there are other groups that are basically still, candidates that are still undefined. But what's interesting to me when you look at and you kind of scratch past the horse race numbers is you see a very different dynamic. And that dynamic is you have Biden and Sanders, who are still very strong, but they're at a ceiling of support. Whereas you have all these other candidates that are, if you will, the newbies, that are the contenders and challengers that are not even begun to really penetrate and gain support. And that makes it a very unstable race.
It's got to be quite troubling, I would say, if you're Biden or Bernie Sanders and you're at the top right now, because there's only one way for you to go, some would think. You've been looking at the numbers, Evan, and some of the polling and some of the reading the tea leaves a little bit. There's some troubling signs for the president you see in 2020?
Yeah, Republicans have had a demographic crisis that pre-existed Donald Trump. The president was able to get 66% of white, non-college educated voters to vote for him in 2016. And that was 46% of the electorate in 2016.
It's a big chunk.
But that is expected to drop to 43% in 2020. Think of it this way. The President of the United States won the presidency by 77,744 votes, which was the combined total margin between him and Hillary Clinton in Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. You take away just 1 to 2% of that vote, or of the overall non-college educated white vote, and you shift that to Democrats, that's huge. That's why you need to have a candidate who can speak to non-college educated white voters.
And Chris, who is that candidate?
Well, I don't think it's just one. I mean, you know, again, going back to the Iowa poll, what I thought was interesting about Iowa, and listen, demographically, Iowa is very white in terms of the voters in the caucus. That's just, you know, that's just the reality. But in terms of what they wanted, what was I thought was interesting, you know, there was a specific question about, you know, is it important to nominate a woman and or a person of color? And what you found was almost 1 out of 2 voters in Iowa thought it was. And I think it's a reflection of what they see as a changing country that is demographically very different than it was 8, 12, let alone more years ago. And that, I think, is going to be a challenge for every candidate. Now, if you're not a woman and you're not a person of color, you're going to have a different kind of message and strategy to appeal, I think, to voters in an increasingly diverse electorate. And I think that is the major fundamental problem that Trump has going into the general election.
And the mind-blowing stat that I just read, I had just realized that it's been 15 years since there was a white man at the top of the Democratic nomination ticket. Amazing. Chris Kofinis, thank you. We're going to have to leave it there. Evan, thank you as well.
What can you do? We can't handle it anymore. Our country is full. Can't come in. I'm sorry. It's very simple.
So back with me now is Chris Kofinis, the Democratic strategist and the former chief of staff of Senator Joe Manchin, and Republican strategist Evan Siegfried. Evan, is Trump, so the question to you, I'll start with you, Evan. So is Trump, what's the state of play right now with this anti-immigration rhetoric for him?
That's what fires up his base. We saw it in 2016, and the president needs his base politically right now to stand by him if everything else that's happening, be it congressional investigations as well as 2020. The president is right. There is an immigration crisis. However, he's wrong as to what the crisis is. Yes, we have to have more capacity to deal with asylum applicants, which is why Ted Cruz came up with the plan to install more administrative law judges who could speed up the process and hear more asylum claims. At the same time, the president talks about illegal immigration and how we have to deal with it. The crisis isn't on the southern border. It's on visa overstays. Since 2006, more illegal immigrants have come into the United States by overstaying their visa than have come from the southern border.
And are they expanding the visa, the visa applications, or what they've granted? I believe they're
the H-2B visas have nearly doubled under the Trump administration. But here's the thing: the president should listen to his former outside counsel, Chris Christie, who said in the 2016 presidential election that there should be a biometric entry and exit visa, and that would crack down on a lot of the illegal immigration here and is the actual crisis.
Chris, let me get you weighing on this. In particular, we're going to switch to Beto O'Rourke, who made headlines comparing Trump's remarks to those of Nazis. Take a listen.
The President of the United States has called Mexican immigrants rapists and criminals. Now, we would not be surprised if in the Third Reich other human beings were described as an infestation, as a cockroach or a pest that you would want to kill.
Is that fair game to compare the sitting president to a Nazi?
Well, I don't know if it's fair game. I mean, here's the problem. I think the president, for the last 3 years, even before he was president, has used this issue as a divisive wedge in the country. There's no disputing that. His rhetoric has been racist. There is no disputing that. He still keeps kind of concocting this crisis at the southern border, a crisis that he is helping create and manufacture. The notion that the country is full is comical. Putting all that aside, you know, your job and responsibility as president is to solve problems, not perpetuate them. He's not willing to work with Democrats to try to solve immigration. He's not even willing to work with Republicans to solve immigration. Then the question is why? And the reality is it's because for him, it is a political issue. Evan's right about that. It is something that he's going to basically help, you know, energize his base. The unfortunate part about that is the impact it has on this country. It just further feeds this divide and this anger that we are clearly seeing is pervasive. So the president basically creates, I think, the problems that he then fixates on, which is a comical tragedy of his presidency.
All right, so to pick up on that, on what Chris is saying right there, Evan, is this what's going to be his core message come Trump 2020?
First of all, I'd like to thank Chris for saying I'm right for the first time in history. And he put it on my LinkedIn.
Maybe the last.
Maybe, but I'll take it where I can get it. Yes, this is the president's core message because it's all political. It's all about keeping that base and keeping that level of support. Otherwise, the bottom will drop out. I used to live in a Trump building. And Trump buildings, they look good on the outside, but they're horribly made on the inside, which is a perfect metaphor for this administration. They are not well put together. They're not achieving results. And the president is selling sausage while saying it's the most amazing thing since sliced bread when he has nothing really to sell and offer the voters other than feelings. And we know that presidents are not graded on what feelings they engender. They are graded on results. So he's going to have to find a way to pivot to results if he wants to be successful in 2020.
And Chris, really quickly, you know, the president says that he gives Mexico 1 year to get a handle on its immigration issues, but his administration has asked for 2 years to reunite migrant children with their families. How does that square away?
I mean, this is just, like I said, it's empty rhetoric. The president is not, let's be really clear. He's not going to solve this problem. He doesn't want to solve this problem. He's never going to solve this problem. He's incapable of solving this problem or any problem. And I think that is the reality and the frustration that the American people feel, let alone Democrats feel towards this presidency.
And there are many Democrats say it's a problem that he has aggravated, and now he's out there with his own version of a solution. My thanks to Chris Kofinas and Evan Siegfried. Thank you.